What is up, Soul Family? We are on the Art of Life podcast, and today we're talking about fostering a relationship with yourself, your inner critic, and what your winning formula is. So let's get started. I know I'm a little bit late, guys. I appreciate you guys for still listening. I highly advise that you guys subscribe, whether you're listening on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so you get notified when I'm posting new content. So I was saying last week every 2 weeks, but realistically, this is like really a passion project. I'm not monetizing this at all. I just enjoy sharing the knowledge. And like I've said many times, this podcast is for who I was when I was a kid. All the knowledge I wish someone had told me and putting it out there, because if I needed it, that means someone else needs it. But because it's not my main priority, it's not being monetized. And I really want to make sure that what I put out is good and helpful. So when I'm on a timeline, sometimes some of the episodes weren't as good as the other ones because I was like, every week. So now make sure you subscribe, and I'm just going to be releasing episodes as I'm called to. I'm still aiming for every 2 weeks, but like this episode I was going to record last week, and there's a couple things I was still mulling over to make sure this is what I wanted to share. Now this week we're talking about fostering a relationship with yourself, and it's something that I've had the privilege of having a lot of alone time and a lot of seclusion, being bedridden, like a lot of times with just myself and my thoughts, where I've been able to foster a relationship with myself. And there are many parts of us, but I want to talk specifically about your inner critic. There's a small percentage of the world, from my understanding, that doesn't have like voices inside your head. But let's test it out. I'm gonna, be quiet for a second, see if you can hear that voice. Maybe it was like, man, that's a weird thing to do a podcast. He's just not gonna talk. Whatever your voice said, or maybe you're driving and you notice something. But there's that voice that's there, and our awareness of it. When you live with something all the time, you don't necessarily become aware of it until someone points it out, right? That's a big benefit of meditation. So what is our inner critic? And it's that voice in our head that is constantly criticizing us, right? I remember a long time ago, my strength and conditioning coach, who was also a mindset coach, absolutely amazing, someone I strive to be like, told me, you've gotten so far so quickly because of a specific way of being. He goes, that's also why you're not getting any further. And that was like 5 years ago. And it's now clicking what he meant by that. And I asked him questions, and he's like, I can't give you the answer. You have to ponder this. You have to sit with it. You have to meditate with it. And what it is how harsh my inner critic is, right? So there's different types of fuel, and we've talked about this. The fuel that allows me to move forward with my life was very shame-based, and even so, like, I lacked grace with myself. I lacked self-love and self-compassion because those things to me subconsciously were cop-outs, right? And so a lot of my accomplishments were kind of from this, like, maybe dark fuel source, this shameful fuel source that allowed me to not show up any other way. And it cost me huge, right? I always talk about everything's going to give us a reward and everything's going to cost something. And until we're really aware of what the cost and the reward is, it's hard for us to change. And so the reward was really good up until a certain point where, like, I've accomplished a lot of amazing things despite my circumstances. And the cost is self-sabotage. The cost is lack of self-love, lack of self-respect. And so understanding that, hey, you have this inner critic. And he actually, the same guy, Coach G, shout out to Coach G, was telling me, he goes, I named my inner critic. Right, personifying that negative voice in your head can really help, and I have as well. And we talked about this before, but my inner critic's name is Jin. And just that little personification of that voice really helped me keep it at bay, right? Really helped me keep it under control, because remember, we talked about how everything in our life, our emotions, our feelings, they're survival mechanisms. And this also is a survival mechanism, but it's hurting us. For a lot of us, a lot of people, and I spent years of my life trying to kill off this thing, and what you resist persists. Truly, what you resist persists, and it's just a part of you that you can't kill. You cannot kill that inner dialogue. You cannot kill that inner narrative, and so you get to control it, though. Right? I want to think you want to think about it as like a trained soldier. It's your soldier for you, and you've just poorly trained it. Right? So Jin is my relationship, my inner critic. His name is Jin, and I think about, like, if someone else talked to me the way I used to talk to myself, we'd be fighting, we'd be throwing hands. And so that's something I wish I'd understood so much younger. And I had to go through all these things, but that's why I was in the hospital recently. That's why I was in the hospital 2 years ago, It's because this shame-based fuel forced me to show up even when I couldn't, until my body just stopped working, right? And so there's all these different parts of us, right? There's the self-love and self-respect thing, which I talked about a little bit earlier, right? So don't allow anybody to be berating, to be abusive, to be mean, including yourself, right? I don't let anyone else in my life berate, be abusive, or be mean to me. Why would I let myself do that to myself? Now, there's self-love and self-respect. And self-love is about treating yourself with kindness, compassion, understanding. We talked about grace, accepting yourself for who you are. You know, I'm short, I will always be short, and that's cool. I like it, right? It's being nurturing. I think of like my self-love as my mom energy, you know, your self-parenting, your mom energy. Now, self-respect, on the other hand, is about recognizing my own worth. It's about ensuring that I don't settle for anything less than I'm willing to. And it's how I also let other people treat me, right? I make sure the decisions, the actions I take are in line with someone I would respect, including myself. And so they're words that get interchanged a lot, but mean totally different things. And so I look at like self-love as like the part of me that's mothering and nurturing, and self-respect is the part of me that's like nurturing as a father, because they're very different energies, right? If you want to think, so I think about my nephew Nico, and I've talked about him a lot, and he lives far away, but I just love him so much. Every time I see a video of his face, every time I hang out with him, my heart flutters, and I just love this kid. And I respect him, but the level at which I can respect him is only which he can show up. He's 4 years old, right? We respect people who have done really difficult things. We respect people who have done things we want to do, and he hasn't had that opportunity yet. So yes, I respect him as a human in his autonomy, and that he has boundaries and he has emotions and feelings, but the idea of like respecting his accomplishments, he hasn't gotten to earn that yet. And that's totally cool. Doesn't mean I don't respect his boundaries and feelings and emotions, but that form of respect. And so that kind of gives you the idea between self-love, self-respect. And so we have this inner critic, this self-love and this self-respect, and many other pieces of us that are always in conflict inside of us, right? And I'm saying this, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are resonating. And the reason for that is humans aren't that different. I've read some psychology books. I talked to a counselor, and I'm starting to realize that like everything we feel, someone else feels, almost always. So I like to compare it to like what I thought immediately when I realized this was like, oh, it's like Eevee in Pokemon. For those that don't know Pokemon, Eevee is like this really cute little Pokemon, and based on the stone you touch it with, it evolves into something different. I think there's like 8 different things. And so 2 people can have the same experience happen to them, and it will change them in one of like 3, 4, 8 ways, and they make decisions whether consciously or subconsciously. And that's when I get into what is my winning formula, okay? This is something I learned through the personal professional development world. I'm so glad I went down that route. There was goods and bads, but the good strongly outweigh the bad, and your winning formula are decisions you make as you become an adult, right? So sometimes something will happen and we'll feel embarrassed, we'll feel hurt, and we decide subconsciously that shit's never going to happen to me again, and I'm going to make sure that it's not going to happen by being blank, right? And so I can tell you a lot of times we can predict what someone's winning formula is based on their resume, right? Like, hand me your resume. For example, through a lot of self-work, the ones that made the most sense and resonate the strongest with me, my winning formula is being kind, being tough, and being cool, right? You can see that on my resume. You can look at the jobs I've done, the things that interest me. And I look at the biggest breakdowns and conflict in my life. They were issues that being cool, being tough, and being kind didn't get me through. And so by understanding that, I learned to develop new ways of being. So being more intellectual, being more analytical, being more curious. These are all ways of being that help me deal with things that are hard, that help me deal with learning how to be a better human in my standards. So at the end of the day, we all have this winning formula, and we all have this inner critic, the vast majority of us, and it's not something we can kill. So what are we going to do about it? Well, train that guy. I learned to use him as, Jin is sometimes also my gratitude. Jin is my grace, right? Where I'm never going to do that shit I did again, where I shamed myself to the point where I put myself in the hospital because I needed to work harder. I needed to go more. I needed to do this. Like, no more. That shit is never going to happen again. I needed to learn. And so I did, right? And I'm still learning, and I'm still working on the fact that once you become aware of something, you can change it, right? And we talked about this in so many episodes, whether it's your belief or your relationship to death or your relationship with fear, your relationship with the opposite sex, with your parents. We're always these like bundles of nerves that are being activated and triggered and react in certain ways based on our subconscious. We don't have as much control as we think, right? And once you accept that you don't have as much control as you think, you can look at the places where you don't have control and you can choose to go into them and retrain them, right? Like I'm constantly retraining Jin. Like he'll say some shit that's out of pocket and I'll be like, no, man, look, these are the circumstances, right? And this is the same with like imposter syndrome. And something everyone who I know and love who have accomplished a lot has dealt with, and I've dealt with a lot of it. The famous story of my friend who's a swimmer who thought everyone was drowning. I thought everyone knew how to fight until I became a bouncer and I went to clubs and I saw people fight in the street and I was like, oh, no, my peers know how to fight because I spend all my time at the gym, right? All my friends are fighters and martial artists and coaches. The vast majority of the real world. And I remember listening to that interview where there's a gangster that was talking about like putting his Glock in his pants, and it had never occurred to him that he was just a small percentage of the population that lived that way. To him, everyone lived that way. Because, right, we're just a system of our environment, and what we see is what we deem normal. And so, that imposter syndrome is really cool because, I'm getting more recognition. I have over 70,000 followers across platforms. And so there's bound to be some haters. And it's cool to me when I have haters and I can brush off what they say. Because I remember a friend of mine always said, she's like, if I call you a fat purple platypus, you're not that. So it's not going to hurt your feelings. Right? When you're really aware of what you are, it's really hard to hurt your feelings. You become kind of bulletproof. And that's like what I'm working towards. I'm definitely not there. There's definitely times I think I suck. There's definitely times where I shame myself. But now, instead of it being subconscious, I'm just trying to be aware. I'm trying to have this thing where I'm programming myself to, when I fall into that trap of that critic talking terribly about myself, or fueling myself with shame, or reading some negative comments or message, and then it's so easy for us to forget the good and incorporate the bad, right? Because whatever we believe personally, that evidence is what we're going to take in, right? We saw that with every argument ever with politics. People will discredit any information that says that they're wrong, right? It's that cognitive dissonance and that confirmation bias. I think that's all I really wanted to say. I appreciate you guys very, very much. Share this podcast with someone you think will find a benefit, someone who's hard on themselves, who needs to hear it. I appreciate each and every one of you guys so much. This is really a passion project, and you guys taking the time to listen to me. Everyone sends me a message and gives me advice on episodes to make. I just warms my heart. I really, I'm not where I want to be, but I'm so proud of where I've come, because I never really looked back, because that was like a waste of time, arguably. But looking back, you make me realize, like, holy shit, like so many of my goals I've accomplished, and like that part of me that fuels shame will never be able to accept accomplishment. And so sitting in it is really powerful. And remember, rate the podcast 5 stars if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're on YouTube, please follow. Please leave a comment. If you guys listen to the whole episode, let me know. That's really fucking cool. And last and not least, the quote. And it's a quote from a book called The Untethered Soul. It's written by Alan Singer. This is a long one, guys, but it's just captured what I've been wanting to talk about so well. The bottom line is undeniable. If somehow the voice in your head managed to manifest in a body outside of you, and you had to take it with you everywhere you went, you wouldn't last a day. If someone were to ask you what your new friend is like, you would say this is one seriously disturbed person. Just look up neurosis in the dictionary and you'll get the picture. That being the case, once you spent the day with them, what is the probability that you would go to them for advice after seeing how often this person changes their mind? How conflicted they are on so many subjects, and how emotionally overreactive they are tended to be. Would you ever ask them for relationship or financial advice? As amazing as it seems, you do that just about every moment of your life. Having taken its rightful place back inside of you, it's the same person who tells you what to do about every aspect of your life. Have you ever bothered to check its credentials? How many times has that voice been wrong altogether? I think that's just like a paragraph that kind of just like summarizes this podcast perfectly. Take that voice out, personify it. If Jin pulled up in front of me, we'd be scrapping, and it would be that. And so if I won't tolerate someone else talking to me that way, I'm not going to tolerate myself talking to me that way, and I hope you guys can do the same. I appreciate you all very, very much. Maybe I'll see you next week. Maybe it'll be a month. Maybe it'll be a couple weeks. Make sure you subscribe so you find out when I'm dropping episodes. And have a great rest of your week, guys. Powerful, growing, being strong. I love you all. Cheers.